I never meant to fall in love with my neighbour. That sounds like something from a movie, doesn't it? But it's true. For 3 years, every Sunday morning at 9 sharp, Mason would knock on my basement door with 2 coffees and that quiet smile of his, and we'd spend the next 4 hours building model trains together. Our wives thought it was just a hobby. 2 married men in their 30s, escaping weekend chores to play with miniature locomotives and hand-painted scenery. Harmless. Innocent. They'd laugh about it at dinner parties, how their husbands were like little boys with their trains, and we'd laugh too, because what else could we do? How do you tell your wife of 8 years that the real reason you disappear every Sunday isn't the trains at all, but the man sitting across the table from you, carefully gluing tiny trees onto foam hills, his reading glasses slipping down his nose in that way that makes your chest ache? It started so simply. Mason and his wife Claire moved in next door about 3.5 years ago. My wife Jennifer was thrilled to have new neighbours our age. She baked banana bread, insisted we have them over for dinner. Mason was quiet that first night, letting Claire do most of the talking. He worked in graphic design, freelanced mostly. I remember thinking he had kind eyes. That was it. Just kind eyes. Nothing earth-shattering. We shook hands at the end of the evening and I didn't think much about it. Then a few weeks later, I was unloading boxes in my driveway, stuff from my parents' attic. Old childhood things. Mason was getting his mail and wandered over, curious. He saw the model train set still in its original box and his whole face changed. Lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. Turns out his dad had collected trains too. We stood there in the driveway for 40 minutes talking about Lionel versus Bachmann, about scale and gauge, about the satisfaction of building something small and perfect with your own hands. Jennifer called me in for dinner, and I remember feeling disappointed that the conversation had to end. The next Sunday, Mason knocked on my door holding a box. Inside was a partially built depot station, something he'd started years ago and never finished. He asked if I wanted to work on it together, said Claire was having her book club over anyway and he needed an excuse to escape. I laughed and said sure. We set up in my basement at the old workbench my dad had built, and that was it. That's how it started. Every Sunday became our day. We didn't plan it formally, didn't put it on calendars. It just happened, like gravity, like something inevitable. For the first year, it really was just about the trains. We built an entire miniature town. Rolling hills made from chicken wire and plaster, a downtown with a hardware store, a diner, a church with a steeple no bigger than my thumb. Mason had this incredible attention to detail. He'd spend an hour painting weathering onto a single boxcar, making it look authentically aged. His hands were steady, precise. I'd watch him work sometimes, forget what I was supposed to be doing. He'd glance up and catch me staring, and I'd quickly look away, make some joke about him being a perfectionist. He'd smile, shake his head, go back to painting. I didn't recognize what was happening. Or maybe I did and I was too scared to name it. All I knew was that Sunday mornings became the thing I looked forward to most. I'd wake up before my alarm, restless with anticipation. Jennifer would still be sleeping and I'd lie there thinking about what we'd work on that day. Whether Mason would wear that faded blue Henley he wore sometimes, the one with the pushed-up sleeves. Whether he'd tell me more stories about his childhood, his voice getting soft and far away. I told myself I just liked having a friend. That's all it was. Male friendship. Nothing unusual about that. But then there were these moments. Small things that felt bigger than they should. Like the time our hands brushed reaching for the same paint bottle, and I felt it everywhere. This electric jolt that made me pull back too quickly. Mason noticed. I saw him notice. Neither of us said anything. All the Sunday it was raining hard, drumming on the basement windows, and Mason said something that made me laugh so hard I nearly knocked over an entire miniature street scene. He caught it, caught my arm too, steadying me. His hand stayed there a moment longer than necessary. I could feel the warmth of his palm through my shirt sleeve. When I looked at him, he was already looking at me, and something in his expression made my breath catch. Then he let go, smiled, made some comment about my clumsiness. The moment passed. Except it didn't. Not really. Around the second year we started talking about real things, not just trains and work and surface-level stuff. Mason told me about his dad passing away when he was in college, how he'd never really processed it, how he sometimes felt like he was sleepwalking through his own life. I told him about the pressure I felt to be successful, to live up to some imaginary standard I'd set for myself. How sometimes I felt trapped by my own choices, even the good ones, even Jennifer, who I loved, who was objectively wonderful. Mason understood. He didn't try to fix it or give advice. He just listened, nodded, kept working on whatever tiny piece of scenery was in his hands. That kind of listening, that quiet acceptance, it's rare. It made me want to tell him everything. One Sunday, Jennifer came down to the basement to ask if we wanted lunch. Mason and I were sitting close together, examining a locomotive under a magnifying lamp. She stood on the stairs for a moment watching us. I felt her watching. When I looked up, she had this strange expression I couldn't read. She asked again about lunch, her voice a little tight. We said, "Sure, thanks." After she left, Mason and I didn't sit quite as close. We didn't talk about it, but we both felt it. The awareness that maybe we looked like something, that maybe we were something, even if we hadn't said it out loud. I started having dreams about him. Nothing explicit, just intimate. Dreams where we were travelling together, or living in some other life where things were different. I'd wake up feeling guilty and confused. I'd look at Jennifer sleeping beside me and feel like I was betraying her with my thoughts. But I couldn't stop. Every week Sunday would come and Mason would knock on the door and I'd feel this rush of relief and happiness that scared me. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just friendship. I knew that, but I didn't know what to do with it. The turning point came about 6 months ago. We were working on this complicated bridge scene, trying to get the angles right. Mason was frustrated, kept messing up the same section. He sat back, ran his hands through his hair, let out this exhausted sigh. Without thinking, I reached over and squeezed his shoulder, just a simple gesture of support. But he went completely still. Then he turned his head and looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw it. Everything I'd been feeling reflected back. The longing, the confusion, the fear. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity but was probably only seconds. My hand was still on his shoulder. I could feel his heartbeat. Or maybe it was mine. Then he said my name, just my name. The way he said it, though, like a question and an answer at the same time. I pulled my hand back, stood up too fast, said something about needing water. I practically ran upstairs, stood in my kitchen trying to breathe normally, gripping the edge of the counter. What was I doing? I was married. He was married. This was insane. But I couldn't deny it anymore. I was in love with Mason. Completely, devastatingly in love. And unless I was reading everything wrong, he felt the same way. When I came back down, Mason was packing up his tools. It was only noon. We never stopped before 2 at the earliest. He wouldn't look at me. Said Claire needed him for something. We both knew he was lying. He left without the usual goodbye, without making plans for next Sunday. I stood in my basement surrounded by our miniature world. This perfect little town we'd built together, and I felt like I was breaking apart. That week was torture. I couldn't focus on anything. Work was impossible. Jennifer kept asking if I was feeling okay. I said I was fine, just tired. I thought about texting Mason 100 times, typed out messages and deleted them. Sorry for being weird. Can we talk? I miss you. I deleted them all. What could I possibly say? On Saturday night I lay in bed convinced that Sunday would come and Mason wouldn't knock, that we'd ruined everything with that one moment of honesty, that I'd lost the best friendship I'd ever had because I couldn't control my feelings. But Sunday morning at 9 sharp there was the knock. I opened the door and Mason was standing there with 2 coffees like always. He looked like he hadn't slept much either. We stood there for a moment just looking at each other. Then he said, "We should probably talk." I nodded, let him in. We sat at the workbench, but neither of us picked up any tools. The silence stretched out, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally Mason spoke. He said, "I need to be honest with you. These Sundays, they're the best part of my week, the best part of my life, if I'm being completely honest, and I think you feel the same way. I don't know what that means or what we're supposed to do about it, but I can't pretend anymore that this is just about trains." My heart was hammering so hard I could barely hear my own voice when I answered. I told him he was right, that I'd been trying to deny it, to explain it away, but I couldn't anymore, that somewhere along the way, building this miniature world together, I'd fallen in love with him. The words hung in the air between us. I'd said it, out loud. There was no taking it back. Mason closed his eyes, took a shaky breath. When he opened them again, they were wet. He said, "I'm in love with you too. I have been for a long time." We didn't touch, didn't kiss, just sat there with this enormous truth finally spoken. It should have felt like relief, but mostly it felt terrifying. Because now what? We were both married. We had lives, commitments, people who depended on us. Mason said, "I don't want to hurt Claire." I told him I didn't want to hurt Jennifer either. But we also couldn't keep doing this, pretending, living in this liminal space between friendship and something more. It wasn't fair to anyone, including ourselves. We talked for hours that day, didn't build anything, just talked. About our marriages, about how we'd ended up here, about what we actually wanted from life. Mason admitted he'd known he was attracted to men since college, but had never acted on it, had convinced himself it didn't matter if he just didn't acknowledge it. I told him I'd never even considered it before him, that my attraction to him had blindsided me completely. We didn't come to any conclusions that day. Mason left saying we both needed time to think, to really think about what we wanted to do. The next few weeks were agony. We didn't see each other. No Sunday trains. I told Jennifer that Mason and I had decided to take a break from the hobby for a while. She seemed relieved, actually. Said it would be nice to have me around on Sundays. I tried to be present, to focus on my marriage, to remember why I'd chosen this life. Jennifer was wonderful, smart, funny, caring. On paper, I had no reason to be unhappy, but I was. Not because of anything she'd done or failed to do, simply because my heart had chosen someone else. I think Jennifer knew before I told her. Maybe not the specifics, but something. She started watching me more carefully, asking questions that felt pointed. One night, about 3 weeks after that last conversation with Mason, she asked me directly. She said, "Are you in love with someone else?" Not angry, just sad. Resigned. I couldn't lie to her face. I told her yes. She asked who. I told her. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I wondered. The way you two were together. I wanted to believe it was nothing, but I wondered. We talked through the night. I apologized over and over. She cried. I cried. She asked if I wanted a divorce. I said I didn't know. I said I was confused and I was sorry and I never meant for any of this to happen. She said she needed time, asked me to sleep in the guest room. I did. Mason called me 2 days later, said he'd told Claire everything, that she'd asked him to move out. His voice was shaking. We met at a coffee shop, neutral territory. He looked exhausted. He said Claire had been devastated but not entirely surprised. She'd felt the distance between them growing for years. Mason said he felt like a terrible person, like he'd destroyed her life. I told him I knew the feeling. We sat there, two guilty men who'd fallen in love at the worst possible time, in the worst possible way. Mason reached across the table and took my hand. It was the first time we'd really touched intentionally. His hand was warm, solid, real. He said, "I don't regret loving you. I regret the pain we're causing, but I don't regret this." I squeezed his hand, felt tears running down my face, said I felt the same way. The next few months were the hardest of my life. Jennifer and I went to counselling, tried to see if there was any way to save the marriage, but we both knew. You can't force love to stay where it doesn't want to be. We separated, started divorce proceedings. It was amicable as these things go, but still painful. Dividing up a life you built together, explaining to family and friends. Some people were supportive, others weren't. My parents struggled with it, especially when I told them I was in love with a man. They needed time to process. I gave it to them. Mason's family was more accepting, but his divorce was messier. Claire was angrier than Jennifer, more hurt. I understood. We'd both broken promises, shattered trust. There was no way to do that cleanly. Mason and I didn't rush into anything. We knew we needed to process our divorces, deal with the guilt, give our ex-wives space. We talked on the phone most days, but didn't see each other much for a while. It was strange, loving someone and choosing to stay apart. But it felt necessary, like we needed to prove to ourselves that this was real, not just an escape from unhappy marriages. When we finally did start seeing each other properly, about 8 months after that first honest conversation, it was different than I'd imagined. Not fireworks and passion, though. There was that too. Mostly it was easy, natural, like coming home. We'd go for walks, cook dinner together, talk about everything and nothing. And yes, we built model trains. Mason brought over some of his collection, and we set up a new layout in my apartment, started building a new miniature world, just the two of us. I'm not going to pretend this story has a simple happy ending because it doesn't. Real life is messier than that. Jennifer's doing okay now. She's dating someone, actually seems happy. We're friendly, which feels like a small miracle. Claire wants nothing to do with either of us, and I don't blame her. Some bridges burn completely. My parents came around eventually, invited both of us to Thanksgiving last year. That meant everything to me. Mason's mum loves me, calls me her bonus son. We're building a life together, slowly, carefully. We got a dog, a golden retriever named Cooper who thinks he's a lapdog. We're talking about buying a house together, one with a basement for our trains. We still build every Sunday. It's our tradition, our thing. Except now, we don't have to hide what it means. Now when our hands brush reaching for the same piece, we don't pull away. Now, when Mason smiles at me over some tiny painted detail, I can smile back without fear. Now, I can love him openly. Sometimes I think about those 3 years of Sundays, building in secret, loving in silence. Part of me wishes we'd been braver sooner, that we'd been honest before vows were broken and hearts were hurt. But I also know that's not how life works. You can't rush these realizations. You can't force yourself to be ready before you are. Mason and I found each other in the way we needed to, in the time we needed to. And now we're here, building something real, something true. Not a miniature world this time, but an actual life together. It's not perfect. We still carry guilt. We still have hard days. But we have each other. And we have our Sundays, our trains, our quiet ritual that started all of this. Our wives never asked why, back then. They didn't see what was really happening in that basement. But I think part of them knew. Part of them always knew. You can't hide love, not really. It finds a way to show itself, even in the smallest gestures, even in the careful way two men build a model train town together piece by tiny piece, Sunday after Sunday, falling in love without meaning to, without permission, but completely, undeniably, all the same.